for Economic Policy and Research, and in New York City, 75% of frontline workers are people of color. That's according to the city controller. NBC News correspondent Morgan Radford is joining us now from New York City. And Morgan, we have talked before about the health disparities in communities of color, but now we're getting a glimpse of the economic disparities, whether that's the number of frontline workers or the percentage of people who are able to work from home. What's going on here?
I mean, that's right, Allison. It's almost like we're looking at phase two, right? We've been reporting for months about the unique impact that COVID-19 has had on communities of color, but now we're almost looking at the way this impact has shifted, now to this staggering economic impact. And the numbers are striking. I mean, you mentioned some of the numbers there in your introduction, but then if you just look a little bit deeper, you even see things that are more alarming. Those who have been surveyed, of those surveyed, 60% of African Americans reported that they had lost their jobs during this pandemic, and that's compared to 48% of their white counterparts. Then when you look at their options, 30% of those people polled, Black, said that they had the ability to actually work from home, but that's compared to, again, a higher percentage of their white counterparts who do have that luxury, and especially as so many states are dealing with these stay-at-home orders. So now many of these frontline workers who are disproportionately Black or brown are saying, now we have this decision. Do we go back to work because we can? Many of them, of course, need the money because they're living at this point paycheck to paycheck, or many of the people we interviewed had for the first time had to file unemployment. But they say, do I take care of my health and the people that I live with when I come home and take care of my family, or do I take care of my livelihood? It's an almost impossible decision, Allison.
Yeah, Morgan, it's just unbelievable. I know you've been speaking with some of those folks who say they have to choose between work and their health. What have they been telling you about that horrible decision they're faced with?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that really struck me was we spoke to this gentleman, Rashad Robinson, who leads the Color of Change organization. He said what's fascinating is that before, a lot of these so-called essential workers were asking people to treat them with the respect and the dignity that they deserve, but they were treated like they were invisible. They were asking for better living wages and things like that, and very few people were paying attention. And then suddenly the pandemic hits. They're now considered essential, but the question is, are they considered essential or are they considered sacrificial? Take a listen to what they had to say.
I'm not going back to work until, if I see these numbers still rising, it's going to be hard.
These are my brothers and my sisters working side by side, and this is an assembly line. We're touching the same parts. We're in the same break area. We spend more time together than our own families. Wow. We don't want to contaminate the community when we go back to work.
We have capitals right now where armed men are showing up. Armed white men are showing up with guns, demanding that basically Black and brown people go back to work.
And Allison, that was another thing that really struck me. I asked each one of those interviewees how they felt about seeing the anti-quarantine protesters who were going to capitals across the country. And one of them said, Morris, who's a gentleman who worked at the Nissan plant factory down in Mississippi, he said, honestly, we all want the same thing. We all want the economy to reopen, and we all want to go back to work. But the difference is in how we do it. And we want to make sure that we're getting PPE, general access to testing, and updated safety standards. We want to do it safely. Allison?
All right, Morgan Radford, just an unbelievable situation. Thank you so much for bringing us the stories and what those people are actually going through. It's one thing to talk about stats, but it's another thing to hear people really tell us what their experience is. Thank you so much. Some investment and advisory firms took funds from the Paycheck Protection Program that were meant for small businesses. The firms weren't facing layoffs. Instead, they were capitalizing on new laws and tax codes, and now some of them are giving that money back. NBC News senior business correspondent Stephanie Ruhle joins me now. And Steph, what exactly happened here?
I mean, it's rather stunning. We found that in the last week, there were companies that, yes, technically had less than 500 people. One specifically, a high net worth broker, essentially, someone who manages money for wealthy people, who has 300 employees, who, based on our reporting and speaking directly to the company, did apply for the loan, was never considering furloughing employees, and obviously still wasn't after they put the application in. And that's just one example. But the examples go much farther, so much that the SEC had to change the rules on PPP last week and let all of those financial firms know, if you plan to take this money, you'll need to publicly disclose it. Because the whole idea is businesses in America have been shut down. The economy has been shut down for any business where you can't go to work. Well, certainly if you are working in finance, working in law, you can do that from home. So we're continuing to see misuse of these funds, but this is the real issue. It's misuse, but until they change the rules, it's not illegal. So, Allison, the big issue that we face right now is the problems we faced in 2008. If you remember, so many people lost their homes in the subprime crisis. And after that, we all threw our hands in the air and we said, somebody's going to pay for this. People are going to go to jail. But they didn't. And the reason they didn't is because technically no one broke the law. And now we do have some members of Congress, some Democrats saying we want more transparency. But that's just on the PPP program. When you think about the overall bailouts, the Oversight Commission that was put together as part of the CARES Act still doesn't have everyone. It has to have a chairperson that both Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell have to agree on, and that person hasn't been chosen yet. That group hasn't been funded yet. So as billions of dollars are going out the door, the concerns are growing greater and greater that people on the bottom are suffering, money is going out the door, and we don't know where it is going.
Steph, to be very clear for our viewers, because of what you said, because it was not illegal for those companies to take that money, are there any penalties if they took it and they're now giving it back?
Well, not yet, because they've decided they're not going to take it. And Secretary Mnuchin has sort of changed some of the guidelines and said anybody who's taken $2 million or more, we're going to be scrutinizing that. So there's a lot of businesses that know they're facing more scrutiny. And the good news is they are giving the money back. And so the money hasn't run out. But the broader issue is this is a lot of money being given out. A lot of it isn't going to the right place. And we know there are so many people out there that need it. And there are many businesses that took the money. And now their problem is they can't bring their employees back. Think about this. If you're a low-wage worker and you're now being called back to work in a restaurant or a bar or a salon, you don't actually know when they're going to reopen. You don't know if you're going to be safe, and you could get laid off again. And by the way, school's still closed. There's no one to watch your kids. So this mismatch in how we're addressing the economic issues of our country is getting worse and worse. And don't forget, we're getting jobless claims numbers tomorrow. That's for the week. We're going to see it for the month on Friday, and things are going to be ugly.
Yeah, those numbers are not going to look good. And Steph, I mean, you mentioned we've heard so many stories of businesses saying, I got to bring my people back so that I get this loan forgiven, and I can't bring them back. I'm having a hard time. It just doesn't make sense. Another question for you. We know the first round of funding for the Paycheck Protection Program, $350 billion ran out. We're now in round two. This time around, is there a cap on how much money businesses can apply for or anything else that sort of helps it shift more towards the little guy?
We are seeing it shift more towards the little guy, but we're hearing more from those little guys that they're not going to be able to meet the requirements. Remember, the only way it gets forgiven is if you don't have to, is if you keep all of your employees. That means you don't have to pay it back. But it's become harder and harder to do that because to run any kind of business, right, you have to be able to plan. You have to be able to say, when do I get to open? Will my customers come back? Will my employees come back? Is my supply chain working? Can I afford all of the infrastructure I need to change to keep my business safe? Well, very few businesses or individuals can answer any of those 5 questions. And so that brings up this other issue. Even if you can reopen, can you survive? And unfortunately, in the short term, that's looking more and more difficult.
You're watching NBC News Now. We've got some breaking news.